You smell the rot before you understand what it is. Something sweet and wrong, mixing with smoke and sewage and the usual smell of bodies pressed too close together. You're in the Subura, and the fountain at the corner, the one that's been running for 100 years, is down to a trickle. Brownish water pooling at the base, flies circling it. A woman is filling a clay jar anyway. She has to. There's no other fountain within reasonable walking distance. And the next one might be worse. She doesn't look at you. Nobody looks at anyone here anymore. Eye contact implies you might ask for something, and nobody has anything to give. You can hear shouting from the next block. Not the usual kind, the market haggling, the arguments over rent. This is different, angrier, desperate. Someone's bakery didn't open this morning, and a crowd has gathered. The bread they were counting on isn't coming. This is Rome, still the capital, still the center of what's left of the empire. But it's not the Rome of marble and triumph and endless expansion. This is Rome at the breaking point, a city built for 1 million people, now straining under the weight of its own existence, held together by systems that are starting to fracture in ways no one wants to admit. The aqueducts still flow, mostly. The grain still arrives, usually. The markets still open, when they can. But everything that used to feel solid now feels conditional. And when a city this size starts to doubt whether the next shipment is coming, the pressure becomes something you can feel in the streets. You're still near that fountain, watching the trickle. The water comes from the Aqua Claudia, one of the 11 aqueducts that feed the city, or it did. Parts of the aqueduct have been damaged, whether by neglect, sabotage, or just the weight of a century without proper maintenance. Nobody's quite sure. The repair crews exist, technically, but they're underfunded, understaffed. And the sections that get fixed first are the ones that feed the imperial district, not the Subura, so the fountain runs weak. And people adjust. They come earlier in the morning. They wait longer. They carry their water further. And they stop trusting that tomorrow will be the same as today. What surprised me is how quickly normal becomes fragile. Rome spent centuries building systems so reliable that people stopped thinking about them. The water just flowed. The grain just arrived. The sewers just worked. And now, even though most of the infrastructure is still standing, still functioning, the doubt itself is corrosive, because once people start wondering if the system will hold, they start preparing for it not to. You're moving now, heading west through streets that feel narrower than they used to. Not physically, the buildings haven't moved. But the crowds have changed. More people on the street at odd hours. More people sleeping in doorways, in alleys, under the arches of old monuments. Rome has always had poor people, but this is different. These are people who had homes, had work, and lost both when their landlord fled the city or their workshop closed or the merchant who employed them decided Rome was no longer worth the risk. The insulae, those towering apartment blocks, are half empty in some places, overpacked in others. Landlords who left stopped collecting rent, so squatters moved in. Entire buildings have been subdivided beyond recognition. Rooms that housed one family now house 3. Fires are more common because more people are cooking in spaces that were never designed for it. You're near the Tiber now, and the smell is worse. The river has always been polluted, that's nothing new, but the usual flow of water through the sewers has slowed. Some of the sewer outlets are clogged. Some just aren't draining the way they used to because the aqueducts feeding them aren't supplying enough pressure. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, is still functioning, technically. Water still flows through it into the river, but in the outer neighborhoods, in the districts that were always an afterthought, waste is piling up. People throw it into the streets because there's nowhere else for it to go. The city used to have workers, public slaves, contracted laborers who cleared the streets, maintained the drains. But funding for that kind of work has dried up. The state's priorities are elsewhere: military, political, survival, so the streets smell, and disease spreads faster, and people who can afford to leave are leaving. You pass a warehouse near the docks. It's one of the Horia, state-controlled grain storage. The doors are reinforced, guarded not by a single board watchman, but by a squad of men with weapons, looking tense, because grain is worth more than money right now. Money is abstract, grain is survival. The supply from Egypt is still coming, mostly, but it's irregular, some months. The shipments arrive on schedule, other months. They're delayed: storms, pirates, political instability in the provinces. Administrators who skim off the top before the grain ever leaves Alexandria, and when a shipment is late, the city notices immediately. The free grain dole, the annona, gets delayed. The markets run low, bread prices spike, and people gather in the forum, angry, looking for someone to blame. The emperor's representatives assure everyone that the next shipment is coming, that the delays are temporary, that Rome's supply lines are secure, but fewer people believe it each time. You're walking north now, up toward the campus Martius. This used to be a field, a training ground for soldiers, but it's been built over for decades. Temples, baths, gardens, monuments to emperors and generals. The baths of Agrippa are here, still open, still functional. Though the water isn't as hot as it used to be and the hours have been reduced, you step inside, pay the small fee, though even that's gone up. The attendant barely looks at you. The frigidarium is half empty. The tepidarium has people, but not the crowds you'd expect. The caldarium is closed entirely. The hypocaust system, the underfloor heating, requires fuel, and fuel costs money, and the baths are operating on a reduced budget. People are still here, though, because the baths aren't just about washing. They're about routine, about normalcy, about maintaining the fiction that Rome is still Rome, that the systems still work. That life continues the way it always has, but the conversations are different, quieter. People talk about who's left the city, which families have abandoned their estates and moved to the countryside or to provincial cities that feel safer, more stable. People talk about grain prices, about whether the next aqueduct will get repaired, about rumors, some true, some not, of barbarian armies in the provinces, of generals declaring themselves emperor, of entire regions slipping out of imperial control. Rome isn't under siege, not literally. The walls are intact. No army is camped outside the gates, but the empire is fracturing, and Rome, the city at the center, is feeling it, not as a sudden collapse, but as a slow withdrawal. Resources that used to flow toward the capital are being redirected. Provincial governors are keeping grain for their own regions. Merchants are finding better markets elsewhere. The roads are less safe, so fewer traders are willing to make the journey. You're in the Forum now. Midday. The space is still impressive: marble columns, temples, the Arch of Septimius Severus, the Senate House, but it's quieter than it should be. There are people here: lawyers, officials, a few merchants. petitioners waiting to appeal to someone about something. But there's a thinness to the crowd, a sense that the forum is going through the motions. The rostra, the speaker's platform, is empty. There was a time when the forum was the political heart of the empire, where decisions were made, laws were announced, power was contested. Now, most of the real decisions are made elsewhere, in the imperial palace on the Palatine behind closed doors, or not in Rome at all. Emperors spend more time in provincial cities, Milan, Ravenna, Constantinople, closer to the frontiers, closer to the armies. Rome is still the capital, officially, but it's starting to feel like a capital in name only. The bureaucracy is still here, the symbolism is still here, but the power is elsewhere. You pass a statue of an emperor, Marcus Aurelius, maybe, or one of the others. The inscription at the base is worn. Someone has scratched graffiti into the marble. Nothing revolutionary, just names, dates, the kind of marks people leave when they want to prove they existed. What's easy to forget is that Rome has been through crises before. Civil wars, fires, plagues. The city has always recovered, always rebuilt. The assumption, for centuries, was that Rome was eternal, that the systems were too strong, too deeply rooted to ever truly fail. But this feels different, not because any one system has collapsed, but because all of them are strained at once. The aqueducts are failing slowly. The grain supply is unreliable. The tax revenue is declining. The population is shrinking. And the empire itself, the thing that made Rome the center of the world, is pulling apart at the edges. You're moving east now, toward the Esquiline. The neighborhood is mixed, some wealth, some poverty, layered on top of each other. You pass an old aristocratic domus, its walls still standing but the courtyard overgrown. The family that owned it left years ago. Now it's been subdivided. Multiple families living in what used to be a single household servant's quarters. Next door, there's a functioning insula, 5 stories, leaning slightly. You can hear life inside: children, arguments, someone coughing. The building is packed, too packed, but rent is cheaper here than closer to the center, so people take what they can get. You pass another fountain. This one's dry, completely. The basin is cracked, and someone's using it as a trash dump. There's no sign saying it's been shut down, no official notice. It just stopped working, and nobody came to fix it. Further down the street, there's a bakery still open. A small crowd is waiting outside. The baker is rationing 2 loaves per person, maximum, not because he's greedy, but because he's not sure when the next flour delivery is coming. His supplier used to be reliable. Now it's not, so he rations. And people accept it because the alternative is no bread at all. This is what strain looks like at street level. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just a steady accumulation of small failures. A fountain that stops working, a bakery that runs low, an aqueduct that flows weaker, a shipment that's delayed. Each one is survivable, but together, they create a pressure that builds and builds. It's afternoon now, and you're near the Aurelian walls, the massive fortifications built to protect the city from threats that used to seem distant, theoretical. The walls are tall, maybe 60 feet in places, thick, punctuated by gates and towers. They're maintained, guarded, because the threats aren't theoretical anymore. Rome hasn't been sacked in centuries, but the possibility is closer now than it's been in generations. Barbarian armies have raided deep into imperial territory. Some have been bought off, some have been defeated, Some have been absorbed into the Roman military as foederati allied troops, which works until it doesn't. The walls create a psychological boundary. Inside, you're in Rome. Protected, safe. Theoretically, outside, the world is uncertain, and more people are choosing outside not because it's safer, but because Rome itself is becoming unlivable. The infrastructure is failing, the costs are rising, the opportunities are shrinking. The city is still the largest in the Western Empire, still home to hundreds of thousands of people, but it's contracting, slowly. Not fast enough to call it a collapse, but fast enough that people notice. Buildings that used to be full are emptying. Workshops are closing. Markets are consolidating. And the people who remain are the ones who can't afford to leave. The ones who don't have estates in the countryside or connections in provincial cities. The ones who built their lives around the assumption that Rome would always be Rome. You're on the Palatine now, looking down at the city. From here, you can see the scale, the forums, the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, the temples, the insulae spreading in every direction, the aqueducts cutting across the skyline. The river winding through it all. It's still massive, still impressive, but if you look closely, you can see the gaps, the buildings that are dark, abandoned, the sections of aqueduct that aren't flowing, the streets that are emptier than they should be. Here's the scale shock. Rome was built to sustain 1 million people. At its peak, it did. The infrastructure, the aqueducts, the sewers, the roads, the warehouses, the markets was designed for that scale. But infrastructure at that scale requires constant maintenance, constant investment, constant political will. And all of that is fading. Not because Romans suddenly forgot how to build or maintain or organize, but because the empire that funded Rome is no longer capable of sustaining it. The tax base is shrinking. The provinces are keeping more of their resources. The military is absorbing more of the budget. And Rome, the city, is low on the priority list. So the systems strain, the aqueducts flow weaker. The grain shipments come slower. The streets get dirtier. The population shrinks. And the city that was once the center of the world starts to feel like a relic, still standing, still inhabited, but no longer essential. It's evening now. You're back in the Subura, near where you started. The fountain is still trickling. The woman is gone. Someone else is there now, filling a jar. Same routine. The bakery that didn't open this morning is still closed. The crowd has dispersed, probably to try another bakery, another neighborhood. The shouting has stopped, but the tension hasn't. You think about the fact that Rome has survived crises before, that the city has been sacked, burned, rebuilt, that emperors have fallen and new ones have risen, that the systems have been strained and recovered. But you also think about the fact that systems can only strain so far before they break. That infrastructure requires maintenance. That populations require food and water and a reason to stay. That empires don't collapse all at once, they fray at the edges, lose coherence slowly, until one day the center realizes it's no longer holding. Rome isn't falling. Not yet. The walls still stand. The aqueducts still flow, mostly. The grain still arrives, usually. The emperor still governs, technically, but standing here, listening to the trickle of a fountain that used to run strong, watching people navigate a city that's slowly becoming less livable. You can feel it, the limit, the point where a city this large, this complex, this dependent on systems working at scale, starts to realize that the systems are failing, and the question is whether Rome will survive. It's what survival looks like when the city is pushed to its absolute limit. Rome doesn't have an answer yet. It just keeps going, keeps rationing, keeps repairing what it can, keeps hoping the next shipment arrives. But the doubt is there now, in the fountain that trickles, in the bakery that closes, in the families that leave, in the slow, grinding realization that nothing lasts forever, not even Rome.